This family has its traditions, Simone.
And respect should belong to everyone.
Respect begins with obedience, remember that. Real respect is earned, never demanded.
Inside the grand ballroom of a luxury wedding venue in Atlanta, as hundreds of guests turned to watch in stunned silence, Simone Carter smiled calmly, met her mother-in-law's eyes and replied, "I will always treat this family with respect, but I will never trade away my self-respect just to earn acceptance." No one in that elegant ballroom realized that her quiet response would become the beginning of a lesson the entire Brooks family would never forget. If you were in Simone's place, what would you have done? Tell us the city you're watching from and share your thoughts in the comments below at exactly 85 a.m. Simone Carter descended the marble staircase of the Brooks family mansion in Buckhead, Atlanta. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting off the crystal chandelier and the long dining table decorated with white orchids. She wore an elegant emerald silk dress, her hair neatly pinned back, and around her neck rested the delicate necklace her mother had given her on the day she graduated from college. Despite her composed appearance, Simone could already sense the heavy atmosphere waiting for her downstairs. Lorraine Brooks sat at the head of the table in a perfectly tailored burgundy suit. Beside her, Harold Brooks had an economic newspaper spread out in front of him. Gregory was checking his phone, while Denise quietly poured coffee into gold-rimmed porcelain cups. Malcolm pulled out a chair for his wife, but his eyes kept drifting toward his mother, as though he were trying to predict what she might say next. Lorraine did not greet Simone. She looked her daughter-in-law up and down before setting her teacup on the table. In this family, everyone eats together. A daughter-in-law should not keep the entire household waiting. Simone glanced around. No one had touched the food, yet the bread on the table was still warm. She understood that this was not truly about waiting. It was a warning that every move she made was being watched. "I apologize if everyone was inconvenienced," Simone replied. "I needed to finish preparing for an important presentation at work, so I came down later than expected." Gregory gave a mocking laugh. "What presentation could possibly be so important that you forgot you just married into one of Atlanta's most respected families?" Malcolm frowned slightly but said nothing. Simone calmly took her seat. "It is an expansion plan for 6 distribution centers. If it is approved, the project will create hundreds of new jobs." Lorraine slowly sliced a piece of fruit. "Your work sounds impressive, but marriage requires a woman to adjust her priorities." "I agree," Simone said. "Both the husband and the wife need to make adjustments." The fork in Gregory's hand stopped moving. Harold looked up from his newspaper. Denise glanced at Simone with an expression that held both concern and admiration. Lorraine leaned back in her chair. "Are you suggesting that Malcolm should change his schedule for family responsibilities too?" "I am saying that marriage requires effort from both partners." Silence settled over the long table. Malcolm placed his hand over Simone's beneath the edge of the table. The gesture was gentle, but it was not enough to replace spoken support. She briefly squeezed his hand before pulling hers away, not because she was angry, but because she wanted him to understand that support could not remain hidden under the table forever. Lorraine pushed a thin folder towards Simone. "These are the household schedule and the rules of the Brooks family. I think you should read them carefully." Simone opened the first page. Every line was presented formally, like a corporate policy document. Mandatory family meals, social events every member was expected to attend. Rules about using the living room, receiving guests, and contributing to the family fund. What caught Simone's attention most was a requirement stating that daughters-in-law had to inform Lorraine in advance about business trips, major financial decisions, and personal plans that could affect the family's public image. Simone closed the folder. "Does Malcolm have to follow these rules too?" Lorraine did not answer immediately. "Malcolm is a son of this family. His role is different." "How is it different?" Gregory laughed, this time making no attempt to hide his contempt. "Simone, you may supervise employees at your company, but this is not your office. The Brooks household has its own order." Denise lowered her eyes. Harold sighed quietly. Malcolm remained silent. Simone looked at her husband. Did you know about this document? Malcolm shifted uncomfortably. I knew my mother had certain expectations, but I did not think she would put them in writing. Do you agree with them? Malcolm looked at his mother, then back at his wife. I think we should discuss this privately. Lorraine immediately interrupted. There is nothing to discuss privately. These rules help this family maintain stability. Outsiders may call it control, but those who understand the value of tradition call it discipline. Simone felt disappointment rise within her, not because of Lorraine's words, but because Malcolm was still choosing delay over courage. She had believed that after their wedding they would build a home of their own together, but this elegant mansion was revealing a different truth. Malcolm had never fully stepped away from being a son who needed his mother's approval. Simone placed both hands on the table. I respect this family's traditions. I am also willing to contribute, attend important events, and care for our relationships. But I will not ask permission to do my job, and I will not give anyone control over my personal finances. Lorraine stared at her without blinking. Are you refusing the rules of this family? I am asking us to distinguish responsibility from control. Gregory leaned forward. You have barely entered this house and already you want to change everything. That is the problem with women who become too successful. They think degrees and titles give them the right to challenge every boundary. Simone refused to respond to the insult. Instead, she turned to Denise. Were you ever asked whether you agreed with these rules? Denise was so startled that she nearly dropped her spoons. She looked at Lorraine, then at Gregory beside her. I suppose things have always been this way. That is not an answer to my question. Gregory struck the table lightly with his palm. Do not drag my wife into your argument. Denise immediately drew back. The movement was small, but Simone noticed it. This was no longer just about her. Those rules had existed long enough for everyone to mistake silence for consent. Harold folded his newspaper. Perhaps Simone has asked a reasonable question. Lorraine turned toward her husband. Are you trying to turn this conversation into a vote? No, Harold replied. I simply believe that someone cannot be called a member of the family if their voice is never heard. Gregory shook his head. Malcolm sat straighter, but he still said nothing. Simone understood that she could not force him to grow in a single conversation. But she also could not keep pretending that his silence did not hurt her. She stood, picking up her cream-colored leather handbag. I will read this document carefully. Then I will write down the principles I believe a fair family should follow. We can sit down and discuss them together. Lorraine raised an eyebrow. You think you have the right to write rules for the Brooks family? Simone met her eyes. No, I believe everyone in this family has the right to help create them. She turned toward Malcolm. I do not need you to fight against your mother. I need you to stand up for our marriage. Malcolm opened his mouth, but no words came. Simone walked out of the dining room with quiet dignity. Behind her, the table remained covered with beautifully prepared food, but no one had any appetite left. Lorraine stared at the folder, lying on the polished surface, realizing for the first time that her young daughter-in-law had not entered the family to seize power. Simone was simply refusing to lose herself, and that was what frightened the Brooks family most. The Brooks family mansion glowed beneath warm golden lights as the first guests entered the backyard for the family's annual scholarship fundraiser. Soft jazz blended with the polished conversations of business leaders, attorneys, and longtime partners, giving the evening an atmosphere of refined elegance. Simone Carter wore a champagne gold evening gown with delicate embroidery, her curls styled neatly around her face, and a composed smile resting on her lips. Happy. Anyone meeting her for the first time would have assumed that she had belonged to the Brooks family for many years. Lorraine Brooks stood near the entrance, greeting guests with effortless authority. Whenever someone arrived, she introduced Malcolm as the family's gifted architect, Gregory as a partner at a prestigious law firm, and Harold as the man who had established the foundation upon which the entire family had built its success. When it came to Simone, Lorraine simply smiled. This is my new daughter-in-law. That was all. No mention of her profession, no acknowledgement of her achievements. Not a single word about the woman who managed operations for a major logistics company. Several guests politely nodded at Simone before quickly moving on to other conversations. Malcolm noticed. Mother, Simone is the chief operating officer of Lorraine gently cut him off. This is a gathering for family and friends, not a business conference. Malcolm fell silent. Simone kept smiling. She refused to let her emotions show. A little later, Denise approached her. Are you all right? Simone nodded. I'm fine. I know mother is not trying to hurt you. Simone looked at her sister-in-law. Some wounds do not need to be inflicted in anger. Denise lowered her eyes. She understood exactly what Simone meant. For years, Denise had also been introduced to others only as Gregory's wife. It was as though every achievement she had earned before marriage had simply disappeared. Gregory suddenly approached them with a drink in his hand. Simone, yes, I heard your company recently opened another branch. That's right. Do you still have enough time to take care of your husband? Several people standing nearby laughed quietly. Simone answered calmly, managing time is part of my job. Gregory shrugged. I'm only concerned that the more successful women become, the more likely they are to forget their families. Simone looked directly at him. Have you ever asked Malcolm that question? Gregory paused. Why would I ask my brother? Because marriage is the responsibility of two people. The atmosphere around the table immediately shifted. An older businessman standing nearby smiled. That is a very fair answer. Gregory looked displeased. He changed direction. In the Brooks family, women have always placed the family first, Simone replied gently. And the men should do the same. The businessman laughed. She is right. If only one person is expected to sacrifice, then it is no longer a partnership. Gregory had no response. Lorraine had been watching the entire exchange from a distance. She walked over. Simone, could you go into the kitchen and see whether the staff needs any help? Of course. Simone immediately went inside. In the enormous kitchen, 4 professional chefs were completing the final dishes. A middle-aged woman looked at Simone with surprise. Ma'am, is there something you need? Simone smiled. My mother-in-law asked me to come in and help. The chef looked around, but everything is already finished. Another member of the staff laughed. We are actually trying to keep people out because there is hardly enough room to move. Simone nodded quietly. She understood. The purpose has never been to help. It was to remove her from the conversations taking place among the guests. She did not return outside immediately. Instead, Simone began talking with the chefs. She asked about the menu, the ingredients, the traditional dishes of the American South. The atmosphere in the kitchen quickly became warm and cheerful. One chef joked, "You are easier to talk to than many of the guests outside." Simone laughed. That is because all of you are the ones making this wonderful dinner possible. A short while later, Harold entered the kitchen. He found Simone helping the staff arrange trays of food. Are you helping them? I'm mostly keeping them company. Harold looked at the chefs. One of them spoke up. Mr. Brooks, your daughter-in-law is lovely. Another added. She even thanked every person working in the kitchen. Harold smiled. I'm very pleased to hear that. He turned to Simone. You do not have to stay in here unless you want to. I don't mind. Do you know why Lorraine sent you here? Simone looked at her father-in-law. Perhaps she believes this is where I belong. Harold was silent for a moment. The truth is, she thought the guests would be more comfortable if you were not involved in their business conversations. Simone did not look surprised. I understand. Are you angry? No, Harold studied her face. You remind me of Malcolm's mother. Simone smiled. You mean his current mother? Harold laughed. I mean the Lorraine I knew 30 years ago. His words surprised Simone. Harold continued. She was once a young businesswoman who constantly fought to be treated fairly. What changed? Harold sighed. Sometimes after people rise into positions of influence, they unknowingly repeat the very behavior that once wounded them. Simone fell silent. His words remained in her thoughts. Outside, applause erupted as Lorraine began her speech. Everyone quickly gathered around. Simone also returned to the garden. Lorraine stood on a small stage. Today, the Brooks family is honored to continue supporting our community. Her speech was met with enthusiastic applause. When it ended, a young businesswoman approached Simone and shook her hand. I read your interview in the business journal. Lorraine's expression shifted slightly. The woman continued. Your company helped our organization improve its entire supply chain. P. I hope we have an opportunity to work together. Simone smiled politely. Thank you. I would be delighted. Before she could say more, Lorraine interrupted. P. Simone is here tonight only as a member of the family. The businesswoman smiled. Of course, but I believe a woman who builds a successful career while caring for her family deserves to be recognized for her own abilities. P. She shook Simone's hand again before walking away. Lorraine stood motionless. For the first time that evening, she did not know what to say. Denise then approached Simone. Emotion shone in her eyes. P. You know something? What is it? Tonight, I realized that I have become accustomed to letting other people decide my value. Simone gently took her hand. P. It is never too late to change that. Denise smiled. From across the garden, Malcolm watched the two women talking. P. He also noticed the thoughtful expression on his father's face and his mother's unusual silence. For the first time, he understood that the real problem was not whether Simone could fit into the Brooks family. The problem was that the Brooks family had always expected everyone else to adapt to them, while never learning how to respect what made each person different. And Simone's calm strength was beginning to create the first cracks in the walls that had once seemed impossible to break. The private conference room on the second floor of Brooks Development's Midtown Atlanta headquarters glowed beneath sleek crystal lighting. It was the company's annual strategy meeting with members of the Brooks family and several major investment partners. Malcolm had invited Simone because of her extensive experience in supply chain management and her record of helping businesses reduce operating costs. To him, this was an opportunity for everyone to see his wife's true abilities. What he did not know was that Lorraine had prepared something very different. Simone entered the conference room wearing a beautifully tailored ivory suit, nude heels, and carrying a dark brown leather portfolio. She greeted each guest with a warm, confident smile. Several people recognized her from business forums and stepped forward to shake her hand. A female executive greeted her warmly. It is wonderful to see you again, Simone. I still have your presentation on logistics management. Simone smiled. Thank you. I hope we will exchange more valuable ideas tonight. Lorraine stood at the head of the table, quietly observing every interaction. Once everyone had taken their seats, she began. Tonight we will discuss the new commercial complex. All professional opinions are welcome. Simone nodded and opened her tablet, ready to take notes. But just before the meeting began, Lorraine turned toward her. Simone, could you help the secretary prepare coffee for our guests? The entire room suddenly fell silent. Several people wondered whether they had heard correctly. The young secretary immediately stood. Mrs. Brooks, everything has already been prepared. Lorraine smiled calmly. I simply believe Simone should learn how to take care of guests before participating in important discussions. Malcolm's expression changed. Mother, Lorraine raised one hand to stop him. I am only teaching my daughter-in-law basic courtesy. Gregory leaned back in his chair, clearly entertained. He was waiting to see how Simone would react. Simone closed her tablet. Then she stood. Every eye in the room turned toward her. No one knew whether she would become angry, walk out, or start an argument. Instead, Simone smiled. I am always willing to help when the family needs me. However, Malcolm invited me here tonight as an advisor on the operational side of this project. Lorraine maintained her pleasant expression. Someone else can handle that work, Simone answered gently. Making a cup of coffee takes only a few minutes, but one poor operational decision can take a company years to correct. The atmosphere immediately became tense. An older executive nodded. I believe Miss Carter has a point, Gregory interrupted. My friend, this is a private family matter. The executive smiled. No, this is a business meeting. Anyone with relevant expertise should be allowed to contribute. Lorraine refused to retreat. Simone, do you truly believe you are that important? Simone looked calmly at her mother-in-law. No, I do not believe I am more important than anyone else in this room. Then why are you refusing? Because if I accept being excluded today simply because I am a woman, another woman may be expected to accept the same treatment tomorrow. No one said a word. Even Gregory needed a moment before responding. He laughed dismissively. You are turning a small matter into a speech about equality. Simone shook her head. I am simply talking about allowing people to use the abilities they possess. The young secretary looked at Simone with quiet gratitude. She understood that if Simone remained silent, she might one day be treated as someone fit only to serve rather than someone capable of contributing. Harold spoke slowly from the far end of the table. I believe we should begin the meeting. Lorraine looked at her husband. Can you not see that our daughter-in-law is defying me? Harold replied evenly. I see someone who wishes to fulfill the role Malcolm invited her to perform. Malcolm raised his head. For the first time since their marriage, he took a deep breath and spoke clearly. That is right, mother. Everyone turned toward him. I invited Simone because of her knowledge. If we only needed someone to serve coffee, the company already has a professional hospitality team. Lorraine stared at her son. Surprise briefly crossed her face. Malcolm continued. I do not want the woman I married to be underestimated, simply because she is now a daughter-in-law of the Brooks family. Simone turned toward her husband. She did not smile. But her expression softened. It was the first time Malcolm had truly stood up for their marriage. The meeting officially began. After the architectural team presented the design, one investor raised a question about the transportation system connecting the commercial sections of the complex. No one answered immediately. Malcolm looked towards Simone. What do you think? Simone opened her documents. She calmly explained the weaknesses in the existing proposal. She recommended relocating the distribution hub, restructuring the delivery routes, and integrating a real-time data management system. Her presentation was concise but precise. As charts appeared on the screen, several people began taking notes. One investor spoke in surprise. This solution could save millions of dollars in operating costs. Another quickly agreed. This is exactly the element our plan was missing. Gregory watched the approving expressions around the table. The confidence on his face slowly disappeared. Lorraine also remained silent. She could not deny the strength of Simone's analysis. After nearly 2 hours of discussion, the meeting ended with applause. The largest investor approached Simone and shook her hand. I hope we will have an opportunity to work together again. Simone answered with a modest smile. It would be my pleasure. After the guest hosts had left, Gregory folded his arms. Perhaps you were simply lucky tonight. Simone looked at him. Luck cannot replace years of learning and hard work. Gregory said nothing more. He turned away with a frustrated expression. Only the Brooks family remained in the spacious conference room. Lorraine gathered her documents slowly. Without looking at Simone, she spoke to Malcolm. I never imagined you would oppose me in front of outsiders. Malcolm stepped closer. I was not opposing you. Then what were you doing? I was protecting the partner I promised to stand beside for the rest of my life. Lorraine fell silent. She had never heard her son speak to her with such calm determination. Harold placed a gentle hand on his wife's shoulder. Lorraine, she turned toward him. A family does not become stronger because everyone remains silent. He paused. It becomes stronger when everyone is heard. Lorraine did not respond. She picked up her folder and walked out of the room. The sound of her heels echoed steadily along the wide corridor. She did not realize that during the very meeting she had intended to use to remind her daughter-in-law of her proper place. Simone had shown everyone that respect never comes from bowing one's head before another person. It begins with recognizing your own worth while also being willing to recognize the worth of those around you. As Malcolm watched his mother leave and then reached for Simone's hand, he knew he had crossed an important boundary. From that moment forward, he was no longer merely a son of the Brooks family. He was finally learning how to become a true husband. The Brooks family arrived at the Atlanta business leader's estate to attend an appreciation gala honoring major donors to a community education fund. The building featured striking modern architecture, with enormous glass panels reflecting the evening glow. Hundreds of white orchids decorated the main hall, while crystal chandeliers shimmered above the guests. It was one of the city's most prestigious social events of the year, bringing together influential business owners, attorneys, physicians, academics, and investors. Lorraine Brooks entered wearing an emerald evening gown, maintaining a flawless smile for the press and invited guests. Malcolm looked elegant in a black tuxedo. while Simone wore a sapphire blue floor-length dress with refined detailing. Her quiet confidence and composed presence drew people toward her before the formal program had even begun. A university president approached Simone and warmly shook her hand. I read your article about helping students from disadvantaged backgrounds gain access to professional internship programs. It was a deeply meaningful idea. Simone replied modestly, Thank you. I simply want young people to have more opportunities to prove what they are capable of. Lorraine stood a short distance away, silently watching the exchange. She realized that more people were beginning to recognize Simone, not because she was a daughter-in-law of the Brooks family, but because of what she had accomplished on her own. That realization made Lorraine feel as though her position was slowly being challenged. Once all the guests had taken their seats, the host invited representatives from several major donor families onto the stage for a public discussion. The Brooks family and other prominent families were introduced one after another before the grand audience. When it was her turn, Lorraine stepped forward. She accepted the microphone with her usual confidence. The Brooks family has always believed that traditional values are the foundation upon which every successful generation is built. Applause filled the ballroom, she continued. And those values are preserved within our own household. The women of the Brooks family have always understood that the needs of the family must come before personal ambition. The audience continued listening attentively, but Simone understood that those words were not truly meant for everyone. They were directed at her. Lorraine turned towards Simone with a polished smile. Simone, do you agree with me? Hundreds of eyes immediately shifted toward the young bride. Malcolm gently tightened his grip on her hand. He feared his wife was being drawn into another public confrontation. Simone calmly rose from her seat. She accepted the microphone from an event assistant. I completely agree that family is important. Lorraine smiled with satisfaction, but Simone continued. However, I do not believe that placing family first means a person must abandon who they are. The atmosphere in the ballroom immediately changed. Several guests exchanged glances. Simone continued in a calm, steady voice. When a woman is respected, she's better able to care for and support her family. When a man is respected, he also becomes a better husband and partner. Sacrifice only has meaning when it comes from love, not when it is demanded through pressure. Applause began among several guests seated near the front. Lorraine maintained her smile, but her eyes had grown colder. Gregory immediately stood. I would like to add something. He took the microphone. Every successful family needs someone who has the final authority. If everyone insists on absolute equality, there will be no order. Several guests nodded. Gregory looked directly at Simone. What do you think? Simone smiled. I agree that a family needs unity. Then who should make the final decision? The person with the most relevant understanding of the issue being discussed. Gregory frowned. What exactly do you mean? If the family is discussing financial matters, the person with financial expertise should be heard. If the discussion concerns health, then a physician's knowledge should matter. When it comes to raising a family, both spouses should share responsibility. But if decisions are made solely according to gender, then ability is being ignored. The ballroom fell silent. A law professor seated in the front row smiled. He spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. That is modern leadership. More guests began applauding. Gregory prepared to respond, but he could not find a convincing argument. He returned to his seat with a displeased expression. The public discussion eventually ended. After leaving the stage, Lorraine asked Simone to join her in the garden behind the estate. The surroundings were far more peaceful. Water flowed softly from a marble fountain, and the scent of jasmine filled the air. But the atmosphere between the two women was anything but peaceful. Lorraine studied Simone for a long moment. Do you know what frustrates me most about you? Simone replied gently. I would like to hear it. I feel as though you are always trying to prove that you are right. Simone shook her head. I have never wanted to win an argument. Then why does everyone always seem to take your side? Simone gave a faint smile. Perhaps because I do not speak to defeat anyone. Lorraine fell silent. Simone continued. I am only trying to protect a principle. What principle? That no one should lose their voice simply because they entered a marriage. Lorraine folded her arms. Do you believe I lost my voice? Simone looked at her sincerely. No, then what are you trying to say? I believe you had to fight very hard to earn the position you hold today. Lorraine looked surprised. How do you know that? Father told me you were one of the few successful women in business during the early years of your career. Lorraine did not deny it. Simone continued. That is exactly why I believe you understand how painful it feels to be underestimated. Those words left Lorraine momentarily speechless. For the first time since Simone entered the Brooks family, Lorraine did not feel as though she were facing a rebellious woman. She was facing someone who truly wanted to be understood. At that moment, Denise approached them. She looked worried. Am I interrupting something? Lorraine shook her head. No, Denise took a deep breath. Mother, there is something I have wanted to say for a long time. Gregory had also approached the garden and stopped when he heard her. Denise looked at her husband before turning back toward Lorraine. Years ago, I gave up the opportunity to earn my master's degree because I believed that was what the family expected of me. Gregory stared at her in surprise. Why are you bringing up the past? Denise smiled sadly. Because tonight I realized that no one directly ordered me to give it up. I was simply too afraid of disappointing everyone, so I gave up on myself. Lorraine looked at her older daughter-in-law. She had never known that Denise still carried such deep regret. Simone gently took Denise's hand. It is never too late to begin again. Denise nodded. I think I am going to apply for the program. Gregory opened his mouth to object, but then stopped. He looked into his wife's determined eyes. For the first time, he understood that the woman who had quietly stood behind him for years also had dreams of her own. From a distance, Malcolm and Harold watched silently. Harold smiled. Do you see it now? Malcolm looked at his father. See what? What Simone has brought into this family is not rebellion. He looked toward the three women standing beneath the garden lights. She has brought the courage for each person to finally say what they truly feel. Malcolm nodded slowly. He knew his father was right. For years, the Brooks family had taken pride in its unity. Only now did Malcolm realize that some of that unity had been built upon prolonged silence. Simone had not entered the family to destroy it. She was simply helping them understand that a home can only remain strong when every member is respected, every voice is heard, and every person is free to live according to their own worth. At exactly 9 a.m., every member of the Brooks family gathered in the executive conference room on the top floor of Brooks Development, joined by a family attorney, a wealth management specialist, and a marriage counselor. The modern space featured a long walnut table, contemporary artwork, and expansive glass windows overlooking Atlanta skyline. The room was normally reserved for major corporate decisions, but Simone Carter had requested it for different purposes. To establish family principles through mutual agreement rather than imposed rules. Lorraine Brooks entered first. She looked around the room. It is difficult to believe that a private family matter now requires an attorney. Simone replied gently. I also wish it had never become necessary. Gregory gave a mocking laugh. Wonderful. Our family is about to become a contract negotiation. Harold calmly pulled out a chair. Perhaps we should listen to the entire discussion before reaching a conclusion. Malcolm sat beside Simone. This time he openly took his wife's hand. He did not hide the gesture beneath the table as he had before. It was a small change, but it was enough for Lorraine to realize that her son was no longer the same man who had remained silent during the first family breakfast. The attorney began the meeting. I am not here to determine who is right or wrong. My role is to give every person in this room an equal opportunity to speak and be heard. The marriage counselor continued. Every family has traditions, but traditions can only survive when the people expected to uphold them feel respected. Lorraine folded her arms. My family has always respected one another. Simone did not challenge her. She simply opened the leather portfolio in front of her. May I present something first? Everyone turned toward her. Two words appeared on the large screen. Responsibility, control. Simone stood. I have spent a great deal of time thinking about these two ideas. She looked around the table. I believe every family needs responsibility, but responsibility becomes a burden when it is confused with control. Gregory immediately interrupted. That sounds unnecessarily philosophical. Simone smiled. Then let us use specific examples. P. She moved to the next slide. I completely agree that family members should inform one another when they are traveling for an extended period so that no one has to worry. P. She paused. That is responsibility. She moved to the next line. But when a capable adult must ask permission before fulfilling professional obligations, she looked toward Lorraine. P. That is control. No one spoke. Simone continued. I am willing to contribute to family activities. That is responsibility. P. But if one person is expected to surrender all authority over personal finances, that is control. Denise stared closely at every sentence on the screen. P. It was as though she were finally seeing the shape of the life she had been living for years. Simone took a quiet breath. P. I will always be willing to care for our parents when they need support. That is responsibility. But if that duty is automatically assigned only to daughters-in-law, P. then it is no longer fair. Harold nodded slowly. The attorney continued taking notes. Lorraine remained composed. You speak very well. She looked directly at Simone. P. But a tradition that has existed for decades cannot be changed because of a few carefully prepared arguments. Simone smiled. I am not asking everyone to change immediately. P. Then what do you want? I want each person in this room to answer one question honestly. She turned toward Gregory. Gregory, what? If your daughter marries one day? P. Gregory looked slightly surprised. Would you want her to ask her husband's family for permission every time she wished to advance her career? Gregory said nothing. Simone did not pressure him. P. She turned to Denise. Denise, yes, if you could go back, would you still give up your master's program? Denise lowered her eyes. Her answer was quiet but clear. P. No. The entire room fell silent. It was the first time Denise had admitted that truth in front of Gregory. Simone looked toward Harold. Father. Harold raised his head. P. Do you believe mother had to work twice as hard as many men to build this company? Harold smiled. Yes. Are you proud of what she accomplished? Extremely proud. P. Simone then turned toward Lorraine. I am proud of you too. Lorraine froze. You broke through countless barriers to become a successful businesswoman. Simone spoke slowly and sincerely. P. That is exactly why I do not want the barriers you overcame to be rebuilt in front of the next generation. The room became unusually still. Even Gregory had lost his mocking expression. P. The marriage counselor addressed Lorraine. Mrs. Brooks. She looked at him. If you could return to the beginning of your career, would you want people to trust your abilities? P. Lorraine answered immediately. Of course, then what is Simone asking for that is so different? Lorraine did not respond. She turned toward the glass windows. P. The city's towers reflected across the surface, carrying her thoughts back to the beginning of her career. She remembered being told that women were not suited to leading companies. She remembered crying. P. She remembered her anger. She remembered proving herself through years of relentless work. Yet somewhere along the way, she had begun using those same outdated standards to judge someone else. Malcolm slowly stood. P. Mother, Lorraine turned toward him. I am sorry that I remained silent for so long. She studied his face. Do you believe I am wrong? Malcolm shook his head. P. I believe you have always wanted what you thought was best for this family. He paused. But sometimes what was best for your generation is no longer right for ours. P. Harold looked at his son with unmistakable pride. This was the man he had always hoped Malcolm would become. Gregory unexpectedly spoke. I have a question. Simone smiled. P. Go ahead. If you become more powerful in the future, will you force your beliefs on everyone else? Simone answered without hesitation. If I ever do that, P. then everything I am defending today will lose its meaning. Gregory looked at her for a long moment. Then he gave a slight nod. P. No one knew whether it was agreement or merely acknowledgement, but the resistance in his expression had clearly softened. The attorney stood. I would like to propose a solution. P. He placed a revised document in front of each person. It was no longer titled Rules for Daughters-in-Law. Instead, the new title read Principles of Mutual Respect Within the Brooks Family. P. The draft stated that every family member, whether a son, daughter-in-law, husband, or wife, had the right to pursue a career, to be heard in decisions affecting their life, and to share responsibility for caring for the family. P. Harold signed first. He placed the pen down. I want my children to build a better family than the one our generation inherited. Malcolm signed next. P. Denise picked up the pen with tears in her eyes. Gregory stared at the document for a long time before adding his signature. Only Lorraine remained. She held the pen but did not write. P. Instead, she looked at Simone. Are you certain this is what you want? Simone smiled. I do not want to win. P. I only hope that no one in this family will ever again have to choose between self-respect and belonging. Lorraine sat in silence. Then she closed the pen without signing. P. Although she was not ready to add her name, something important had already changed. For the first time since Simone entered the Brooks family, Lorraine no longer saw her daughter-in-law as someone attempting to challenge her authority. P. She began to see Simone as someone trying to build a home where respect did not belong to a single person. It would become a foundation shared by everyone. At exactly 3:20 p.m. The entire Brooks family gathered once again in the Brooks Development Conference Room to review the final draft of their new principles for family life. The hostility that had once filled the room was gone, but tension could still be seen on every face. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the wide glass windows, casting a soft golden glow across the long walnut table. In front of each person lay an identical folder containing not only the revised agreement, but also a detailed report of every family member's contributions over the years. The meeting facilitator smiled. Today we will not argue from emotion. He rested one hand on the folder. We will examine the truth. Lorraine frowned slightly. What truth? The truth about what has actually been happening within the Brooks family. Simone remained silent. She simply opened the folder in front of her. The first section listed contributions to the Family Scholarship Fund, community initiatives, and charitable programs. Harold spoke calmly. I suggest everyone read the entire report before commenting. No one objected. After reading several pages, Gregory suddenly looked up. I had no idea Simone had contributed this much. He turned toward his sister-in-law. Were all these internship programs supported by you? Simone nodded. They were projects my company developed in partnership with several universities. Gregory continued turning the pages. The next section documented every family activity Simone had participated in since the wedding. Happy. She had never missed an important family gathering. She had accompanied Harold to his routine medical appointments whenever support was needed. She had regularly helped Denise organize charity events. She had even quietly paid tuition expenses for 2 university students without seeking recognition. Gregory exhaled slowly. I truly did not know. Simone smiled. I did not do any of it to be noticed. Lorraine remained silent. She continued reading. The following section contained every professional recommendation Simone had made during Brooks development meetings. Each proposal was accompanied by measurable results after implementation. Harold looked toward his wife. Do you remember the commercial project in North Atlanta? Lorraine nodded. The operating expenses dropped significantly after the revised plan was introduced. Harold smiled faintly. That plan came from Simone. Lorraine looked at her daughter-in-law. She had never asked who created the strategy. She had simply assumed it was the work of the entire corporate team. The facilitator turned to the next section. Now we will discuss something different. He looked around the table. Fairness within a family. He handed each person a sheet of paper. Please answer the question written in front of you. Everyone began writing. After they had finished, he invited Denise to speak first. Denise took a deep breath. The question asks what I regret most. She looked down at her paper. My answer is that I spent too many years being afraid to express what I truly wanted. Gregory turned towards his wife. It was the first time he had heard her state that feeling so clearly. Denise continued. No one directly forced me to abandon my education. She gave a sad smile. But I always believed that continuing my studies would make me appear selfish. The atmosphere in the room grew heavy. The facilitator looked at Gregory. Did you know she felt that way? Gregory slowly shook his head. I thought it was her own decision. Denise met her husband's eyes. It was my decision. She paused. But I made it because I was afraid of disappointing everyone. Gregory lowered his head. For the first time, he understood that some pressures never needed to be spoken aloud to alter the course of a person's life. The facilitator turned toward Malcolm. What about you? Malcolm looked at Simone before answering. I regret choosing silence so many times. He spoke slowly. P. I always believed that avoiding conflict was the best way to protect the family. He then looked toward his mother. But my silence forced the woman I love to face everything alone. P. Simone turned toward him. Her expression softened. Thank you. Malcolm smiled. No, he shook his head. I am the one who should thank you for not giving up on me. P. Lorraine quietly closed her folder. She had never seen her son speak to his wife with such honesty. Finally, the facilitator looked toward Lorraine. Mrs. Brooks, she raised her head. P. If you could choose one thing to change, what would it be? Lorraine remained silent for a long moment. Everyone waited. At last, she began to speak. P. I believe. Her voice was quieter than usual. I became too accustomed to protecting this family in my own way. She looked toward Harold. P. When I was young, I had to work twice as hard to be respected. Harold nodded gently. Lorraine continued. P. I always thought that if my children followed the same path I had taken, they would make fewer mistakes. Simone listened closely. But Lorraine exhaled softly. P. Perhaps I forgot that every generation must find its own path. No one interrupted her. She turned toward Simone. I still do not agree with every opinion you hold. P. Simone smiled. I understand, but I am beginning to understand why you refuse to accept the old rules. Simone replied softly. P. It is enough that we are willing to listen to one another. Harold looked at his wife with deep emotion. P. After so many years together, he knew Lorraine rarely admitted that another point of view might be worth considering. Her words represent a significant change. The facilitator closed his folder. P. I believe this family has achieved the most important thing today. Gregory asked, what is that? Not complete agreement. The facilitator smiled, but the willingness to continue the conversation. P. Everyone stood. There were no more arguments, no mocking remarks. Before leaving the conference room, Denise called out to Simone. Are you available this weekend? Simone turned. Is something wrong? P. No. Denise smiled nervously. I would like your advice about applying for a master's program. Simone's face brightened. I would be happy to help. Denise took her hand. P. Thank you. For what? For reminding me that I am still allowed to dream. Across the room, Gregory quietly watched the two women. P. He finally understood that Simone had never brought rebellion into the Brooks family. She had only asked the questions everyone else had avoided for far too long. Lorraine also watched Denise's hopeful smile. P. In that moment, she understood that a strong family was not one in which everyone followed the same pattern. A strong family was one in which every person had the opportunity to become the best version of themselves while continuing to love, support, and encourage one another along the way. P. At exactly 7:10 p.m., the entire Brooks family and a few of their closest relatives gathered in the main living room of the Buckhead mansion. P. There was no long conference table, no legal paperwork, and no presentation screen like the ones used during their previous meetings. P. In the center of the room stood only a round wooden table decorated with white flowers and small candles, creating an atmosphere far warmer and more intimate than before. P. For Daniela. She was happy. Harold had suggested the gathering after spending weeks observing the changes within each member of the family. He believed that if they had found the courage to confront their differences, they should also find the courage to express the things they had left unsaid for far too long. P. Harold was the first to stand. He looked at each person with a gentle expression. We are not here to make business decisions. He smiled. We are here to talk about our family. P. Everyone nodded quietly. Harold continued. I would like each person to share one thing they are grateful for and one thing they want to change. No one spoke immediately. P. Silence filled the room. Then Malcolm stood. He turned towards Simone. I would like to go first. Simone nodded gently. Malcolm took a deep breath. Simone, I'm listening. P. On our wedding day, I believed loving you would be enough. He lowered his head, but I was wrong. The room became completely still. P. I allowed you to face too much pressure alone. His voice remained slow and sincere. I kept telling myself that silence would preserve peace. He looked directly into his wife's eyes. P. But my silence only caused you pain. Simone said nothing. Emotion shimmered in her eyes. Malcolm stepped closer. I am sorry. P. I am sorry I did not stand beside you from the beginning. I am sorry I forced you to defend yourself alone. He paused. And thank you, P, for not giving up on our marriage. Simone smiled. I forgive you. Malcolm gently took her hand. I promise. From this day forward, you will never have to fight alone again. Harold smiled with quiet satisfaction. He turned toward Gregory. It is your turn. Gregory rested both hands on his knees. A long moment passed before he finally spoke. I used to believe I understood responsibility. He looked toward Denise. But the truth is, I never asked my wife what she truly wanted. Denise smiled faintly. I was never brave enough to tell you. Gregory shook his head. No, you stayed silent because I never made you feel safe enough to speak. He looked sincerely at his wife. I am sorry. Denise reached for his hand. All I need is for us to listen to each other from now on. Gregory nodded. I agree. The atmosphere in the room gradually softened. Then every eye turned toward Lorraine. She remained seated. Her hands were clasped up together in her lap. Harold did not pressure her. He waited quietly. At last Lorraine stood. She looked at Simone for a long moment. You know, her voice was softer than usual. When I was young, people told me that women were not capable of running businesses. Simone listened carefully. I worked day and night to prove them wrong. Lorraine smiled with a trace of nostalgia. When my first company finally became profitable, I cried because I believed I had finally earned their respect. She paused. Perhaps because I had fought for so long. I began to believe that controlling everything was the only way to protect my family. No one interrupted her. Lorraine looked at her daughter-in-law. I never hated you, Simone answered softly. I know. I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid that you and Malcolm would repeat the mistakes I had witnessed in other families. Lorraine lowered her eyes. But I forgot that everyone has the right to write their own story. She stepped towards Simone. The entire room held its breath. I am sorry. Those were 3 words no one had ever expected to hear from such a proud and powerful woman. I am sorry for making you feel that you constantly had to prove your worth. I am sorry for seeing you first as a daughter-in-law, instead of seeing you as a human being. Tears filled Denise's eyes. Gregory sat in stern silence. Even Harold blinked several times to hide his emotion. Simone stepped forward. She gently took Lorraine's hands. Thank you. Lorraine looked surprised. After everything, you are thanking me? Simone smiled. Because you chose to say those words, that required great courage. Lorraine gently tightened her grip on Simone's hands. A meaningful silence filled the room. Harold slowly opened a small wooden box resting on the table. Inside was the old set of keys to the mansion. He looked toward his wife. Do you remember the day we moved into this house? Lorraine nodded. You told me that this home would always be a place where everyone felt welcome. Harold smiled. That is right. He placed the keys in the center of the table. I no longer want them to represent power. He looked at his children. I want them to represent shared responsibility. Lorraine quietly pushed the keys towards Simone. You should keep them. Simone gently shook her head. I cannot. Why not? Because I do not want to replace you. Simone looked at her mother-in-law sincerely. I only want to help you care for this home. Harold laughed warmly. That is exactly the answer I hoped to hear. Lorraine smiled too. She picked up the keys and placed them back in the center of the table. From this moment forward, no one person will hold all the authority. Every family decision will be discussed together. Gregory looked toward his younger brother. It seems we need to learn how to be a family all over again. Malcolm smiled. It is never too late. Dennis looked at Simone. Thank you. For what? For not coming here to win. Dennis smiled. You came here to help all of us become better versions of ourselves. Simon shook her head gently. We are all learning from one another. Beyond the large glass windows, the Atlanta skyline glowed brightly as darkness settled over the city. Inside the Brooks mansion, the invisible rules that had once forced people into silence no longer controlled the family. They had been replaced by honest conversations, apologies born from understanding, and hands reaching toward one another instead of creating distance. Simone realized that the most valuable thing she had gained was not the satisfaction of being proven right. It was seeing the entire family finally understand that respect was not a gift one powerful person gave to someone beneath them. It was a foundation every family member had to build together through kind words, sincere listening, and the courage to place love above personal pride. Chapter 8. A home built on respect. At exactly 10 a.m., the garden behind the Brooks mansion was filled with gentle sunlight as the family hosted its annual gathering and officially launched the Brooks Family Leadership Development Fund. Neatly trimmed maple trees surrounded the spacious lawn, where round tables draped in white cloth were arranged among vibrant flower beds. The guests included close friends, longtime business partners, and representatives from several community organizations across Atlanta. Unlike the gatherings of the past, there was no tension in the air. Instead, the garden felt open and welcoming, filled with warm conversations and genuine laughter. Lorraine Brooks stood beside Simone at the entrance, personally greeting each guest. A businesswoman who had known Lorraine for many years smiled. "Lorraine, I heard your daughter-in-law recently completed a mentorship program for young female managers." Lorraine looked at Simone with visible pride. "That is true," she smiled. "She continues to teach me more than she realizes." Simone was slightly surprised. It was the first time her mother-in-law had praised her so openly in front of others. The woman turned towards Simone. "Congratulations," Simone replied graciously. "Thank you." After the guest walked away, Simone looked at Lorraine. "You surprised me." Lorraine laughed softly. "I used to believe that praising people too much would make them arrogant." She shook her head. "Now I understand that sincere recognition can give someone the strength to keep growing." Simone smiled. "I am glad to hear you say that." Across the garden, Gregory and Denise were speaking with a group of old friends. One of them asked Denise, "Is it true that you are returning to schools?" Denise nodded. "Yes, will it be difficult to balance your studies and family responsibilities?" Gregory unexpectedly answered for her, "We will manage everything together." Everyone looked at him. Gregory smiled. "I once believed that the household was entirely Denise's responsibility." He turned toward his wife. "Now I understand that building a family is the work of both partners." Denise reached for his hand. Her eyes reflected a happiness she had not felt in years. Meanwhile, Malcolm was introducing Simone to a group of business associates. He smiled proudly. "This is my wife, Simone Carter." One man shook her hand. "We have read several of your articles," Malcolm continued. "She's also the person who changed the way I understand partnership in marriage." Simone laughed gently. "I only asked a few questions." Malcolm shook his head. "No. You helped me understand that loving someone is not only about defending them after they have been hurt." He looked into his wife's eyes. "It is also about having the courage to stand beside them from the very beginning." Simone gently squeezed his hand. "We are both still learning." Harold stepped onto the small stage that had been built in the center of the garden. He picked up the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," the conversations gradually faded. "Today, the Brooks family is honored to introduce a project that we hope will create a lasting impact." He smiled as he looked at each member of his family. "The Brooks Family Leadership Development Fund will support young men and women from disadvantaged backgrounds who wish to study leadership, management, and entrepreneurship." Applause filled the garden. Harold continued. "The only requirement for receiving this scholarship will not be gender, age, or family background." He paused. "It will be a willingness to learn and to treat others with respect." The guests rose to their feet and applauded. Harold then turned toward Lorraine. "I would like my wife to say a few words." Lorraine stepped onto the stage. She looked across the audience. Then her eyes settled on Simone. "For a long time, I believed that protecting a family meant keeping everything within strict boundaries." She smiled gently. "But life taught me a different lesson." The guests listened closely. A home does not become strong because everyone is the same. It becomes strong when people learn to respect one another's differences. She turned towards Simone. "Thank you." Simone looked surprised. Lorraine continued. "Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for choosing conversation instead of confrontation. And thank you for helping me understand that true power is not the ability to make others obey." She smiled. "It is the ability to make others feel heard." Long applause echoed through the garden. Simone stepped forward and gently embraced her mother-in-law. There was no longer any emotional distance between them. Only understanding remained. After the speeches, many guests approached the family to offer their congratulations. A young businesswoman spoke to Simone. I was deeply moved by your family's story. Simone smiled. P. Every family goes through seasons when it must learn how to listen again. What do you believe was the hardest part? Simone considered the question. Not changing other people. P. She looked toward Malcolm, Lorraine, Gregory, and Denise as they talked together. The hardest part was becoming humble enough to examine ourselves. P. Near one corner of the garden, Gregory was helping the staff arrange chairs, while Denise discussed her academic plans with a university professor. P. Malcolm and Harold were speaking about a new community project, while Lorraine asked Simone for advice on developing a mentorship program for young women in business. No one was issuing orders. P. No one was trying to prove that they were always right. Every conversation now began with a question rather than a command. P. As the gathering came to an end, the family stood beneath the trees for a commemorative photograph. The photographer smiled. Everyone looked at one another. No one looked at the camera immediately. P. They looked at each other first. Then they all began to laugh. That spontaneous laughter made the photograph more meaningful than any formal family portrait they had taken before. P. It was no longer the image of a family held together by wealth, status, or reputation. It was the image of people who had learned to place respect above pride, listening above prejudice, and love above the desire to control. P. Simone quietly looked at the people around her. She remembered the day she first entered the mansion, when every word had felt like a test. P. Now that same home had become a place where each person could express their thoughts without fear of judgment. She understood that she had never defeated the Brooks family. P. What had truly prevailed was kindness, patience, and the belief that one honest voice could transform an entire generation. That was the greatest gift their marriage had given them all. P. 1 year later, the Brooks Family Leadership Development Fund had awarded dozens of scholarships to young people with big dreams but limited opportunities. P. Simone Carter and Lorraine Brooks frequently appeared together at public discussions about leadership and building healthy modern families. What surprised people most was not the fact that they had once disagreed, but their willingness to share their journey of change so that other families could avoid repeating the same mistake. Denise completed her master's degree with Gregory's full support, while Malcolm launched a communication program for young married couples in the community, teaching them how to build equal and respectful partnerships. Every weekend, the Brooks family still gathered around the large dining table in the mansion, but now every important decision was made only after everyone had been heard. Simone understood that the most valuable thing she had gained was not recognition or victory in any argument. It was seeing a family once divided by distance learn how to love through respect, understanding, and true partnership. The most meaningful lesson from this story is not about deciding who was right or wrong, but about how each person chose to change after realizing that their perspective was not complete. In life, many family conflicts do not begin with hatred. They often grow from habits, prejudices, or ways of expressing love that have existed for so long that no one dares to question them. Respect does not mean abandoning tradition, and equality does not mean denying anyone's role. A strong family is one in which every member is heard, encouraged to grow, and treated fairly. When we learn to see a situation from another person's perspective, arguments can gradually become honest conversations, while control can be replaced by trust. Sometimes, all it takes is one person who is calm enough to protect their dignity while still treating others with kindness. That person can inspire an entire family to change for the better. This is the lasting power of compassion, patience, and mutual respect. If this story touched your heart, tell us the city you are watching from, share your thoughts in the comments, and follow the channel for more meaningful stories.